There's chemicals in your actual bread. You need to know this because what we found in the loaves sitting on grocery store shelves right now will make you question everything you thought you knew about the food you eat every single day. Picture walking down the bread aisle, grabbing your family's favorite brand, trusting that it's just flour, water, and yeast, like bread has been for thousands of years. But independent lab analysis of Canada's top-selling bread brands just uncovered a chemical cocktail that has food safety experts demanding immediate government action. We are not talking about preservatives you can pronounce. We are talking about industrial additives, bleaching agents, and substances used in yoga mats and shoe rubber that are somehow legal in Canadian bread. Some of these chemicals are banned across Europe, but perfectly acceptable in loaves your children eat for lunch every day. But here is the most shocking discovery. The brands advertising wholesome family nutrition and natural ingredients contained the highest levels of toxic additives. The very companies promising healthy bread are delivering a chemical experiment wrapped in plastic, and Canadian families are unknowingly feeding it to their kids. Which popular bread brands are secretly poisoning Canadian families, and why are government food inspectors allowing chemicals banned worldwide to contaminate our daily bread? The real story of Canadian bread starts now. Bread in Canada no longer starts with a baker kneading dough by hand. Instead, most loaves found on grocery shelves are the product of industrial design, not tradition. Across the country, factory lines run around the clock, mixing, shaping, and baking bread at speeds that would have seemed impossible a generation ago. This system is not built for flavor or nutrition. It is engineered for consistency, shelf life, and profit. To meet supermarket demand, manufacturers rely on a tightly controlled process: super high-speed mixers, rapid proofing chambers, and continuous ovens that push out thousands of loaves per hour. Each step is calibrated for maximum efficiency, but this scale comes at a cost. Flour, water, and yeast alone cannot withstand the rigors of mass production. So manufacturers add a host of substances known as processing aids. These are not just preservatives. They are chemical agents that help dough survive the journey from silo to shrink wrap. Some keep the dough stretchy enough for high-speed machines, while others bleach flour to a uniform white or prevent mold from forming on store shelves. The goal is always the same: bread that looks and feels identical, week after week, no matter the season or the source of the grain. Today, ultra-processed bread dominates the Canadian market. According to recent studies, nearly 3/4 of the food supply in North America is now ultra-processed, and bread is a major contributor. The familiar brands that line the bread aisle are designed for long-distance shipping and long shelf life, not for home baking or local taste. For busy families, the convenience is hard to resist. But the reality is, every shortcut taken for efficiency requires another ingredient, another chemical, to make the system work. What started as a solution for feeding millions has quietly turned the most basic food into a laboratory product. The next question is, what exactly are these chemicals, and why are they in our bread? Azodicarbonamide, or ADA, doesn't sound like something you'd find in a bakery, yet it's a staple in the world of industrial bread. This chemical was first developed as a blowing agent for plastics, used to make yoga mats and the soles of sneakers. In Canadian bread factories, it plays a different role. ADA acts as a dough conditioner, making the dough stronger and more elastic so it can survive the punishing speeds of modern production lines. The appeal for manufacturers is obvious. ADA lets them crank out soft, uniform loaves batch after batch. But that convenience comes with a hidden cost. During baking, ADA doesn't just disappear. It breaks down into several byproducts, including a compound called semicarbazide. In 2003, European food safety authorities flagged semicarbazide as a possible carcinogen after animal studies showed it could damage DNA and increase cancer risk. The European Union responded by banning ADA in food entirely in 2010, citing concerns over semi-carbazide's toxicity and the lack of long-term safety data. In Canada, ADA is still permitted in flour at levels up to 45 parts per million. There is no requirement to list semi-carbazide on ingredient labels, and no mandatory testing for its presence in finished bread. The science is unsettling. Health Canada acknowledges that semi-carbazide is a breakdown product of ADA, but has not set a specific limit for it in bread. The European Food Safety Authority estimated that even low daily exposures could pose risks, especially for children and pregnant women. Despite these warnings, bread made with ADA continues to line Canadian supermarket shelves. While some global chains like Subway have removed ADA from their recipes following public pressure, most mass-market brands still rely on it to keep their bread soft and shelf-stable. The result is a chemical trade-off: longer shelf life and perfect texture at the expense of introducing a substance banned in much of the world. For Canadian families, the decision to allow ADA in bread is made behind closed doors, leaving consumers to trust that what is legal is also safe. Potassium bromate is another chemical that has haunted industrial bread for decades. Unlike Azodicarbonamide, this additive is not just controversial. It has been outright banned in Canada since 1994. Yet its story is not over. Potassium bromate was once prized by commercial bakers for making dough rise higher, stay soft, and keep its shape through the violence of factory mixing and baking. But as early as the 1980s, scientists were raising red flags. Animal studies linked potassium bromate to tumors in the kidneys, thyroid, and other organs. By 1999, the International Agency for Research on Cancer had classified it as Group 2B, a possible human carcinogen. In other words, it is suspected of causing cancer, but the evidence in humans is limited. Across the Atlantic, the reaction was swift. The United Kingdom banned potassium bromate in 1990. The European Union followed in 1998, citing cancer concerns and a lack of proof that the chemical fully breaks down during baking. Japan, China, Brazil, and dozens of other countries also banned it. Yet in the United States, potassium bromate is still allowed in bread at levels up to 75 parts per million. The Environmental Working Group lists more than 200 products containing it, mostly white bread, buns, and bagels. Canada's ban is clear on paper, but the additive's legacy lingers. Imported baked goods, mislabeled ingredient shipments, and the vague term dough conditioner on labels mean that bromate has not entirely vanished from Canadian shelves. What is most disturbing is how this pattern repeats. A chemical flagged as dangerous by international authorities remains hidden in North American bread, protected by regulatory loopholes and industry inertia. The official line is always the same: if it is legal, it must be safe. But the science says otherwise. Potassium bromate's carcinogenic shadow is a warning that convenience and profit have too often trumped public health, and it is far from the only chemical in the Canadian breadbasket that is raising alarms. Emulsifiers have become a quiet fixture in the ingredient lists of Canadian bread. Names like mono and diglycerides, DATEM, and soy lecithin appear on labels across supermarket shelves. These additives are not just there for texture, they help bread survive the stress of high-speed mixing, long transport, and weeks in plastic. But recent scientific research has raised concerns that go far beyond shelf life. A landmark study published in Nature set off alarms in the food safety world. Scientists fed common emulsifiers to laboratory mice at levels similar to those found in processed foods. The results were clear. The emulsifiers changed the composition of gut bacteria, stripping away the protective mucus lining of the intestines. Over time, this disruption triggered low-grade inflammation, weight gain, and symptoms resembling irritable bowel syndrome. The implications for human health are troubling, especially when considering the frequency with which Canadians eat processed bread. The list of emulsifiers in bread is long. Mono and diglycerides, for example, are derived from fats but can contain trans fats even when the label says 0 grams trans fat. DATEM, short for diacetyl tartaric acid ester of mono and diglycerides, has been linked in animal studies to heart muscle fibrosis and adrenal overgrowth. Soy lecithin often comes from genetically modified soybeans, and its effects on the microbiome are only beginning to be understood. Each of these additives is designed to keep bread soft, uniform, and appealing, but their impact on the body is not so benign. The Nature Studies findings have been echoed by other researchers who warn that chronic exposure to emulsifiers may contribute to rising rates of metabolic and digestive disorders. The microbiome, once thought to be stable, can be altered by daily consumption of these chemicals. For families relying on packaged bread, this means a steady, invisible influence on gut health. The science suggests that the convenience of modern bread comes with a cost that is only now being recognized. And emulsifiers are just one part of a bigger story, because the next threat does not come from the bakery at all, but from the fields where the wheat is grown. Glyphosate, the world's most widely used weed killer, does not just stay in the fields where it is sprayed. It travels with the wheat from harvest to mill, and ultimately into the bread on Canadian kitchen tables. Farmers have relied on glyphosate for decades to control weeds and to dry out crops before harvest, a practice known as desiccation. This routine treatment leaves traces of the herbicide on wheat grains that can survive milling and baking. While glyphosate was originally sold as a miracle solution for modern agriculture, its presence in food has become a flashpoint for scientists and health advocates. Government testing found that over 40% of Canadian wheat-based foods sampled between 2015 and 2017 contained detectable glyphosate residues. Health Canada sets a maximum residue limit of 5 parts per million for wheat, and nearly every sample fell below this threshold. Yet the very act of setting a limit acknowledges that some level of contamination is expected and accepted. In the United States, independent labs have found glyphosate in sandwich breads at levels ranging from 100 to over 1,000 parts per billion. While there is no published Canadian bread-specific data, the agricultural practices and shared supply chains make it likely that similar residues exist in Canadian loaves. Glyphosate's safety is fiercely debated. The World Health Organization's Cancer Research Agency classified it as probably carcinogenic to humans in 2015, a finding echoed by several international bodies. Other regulatory agencies, including Health Canada, maintain that glyphosate is safe at current exposure levels. But the science is far from settled, especially when it comes to long-term, low-dose exposure through everyday foods. For families eating bread daily, the risk is not from a single slice, but from the steady accumulation over years. What is especially unsettling is how invisible this contamination is. There is no requirement to test every batch of bread for glyphosate, and there is no mention of it on ingredient lists. The result is an everyday exposure that goes unnoticed, quietly entering homes and bodies through the most basic of foods. While regulators debate safety margins, the reality is that bread, once the symbol of nourishment, is now a vehicle for agricultural chemicals that were never meant for the dinner table. On a quiet October morning, shoppers in Ontario, Quebec, and Newfoundland and Labrador found their favorite bread brands missing from the shelves. The Canadian Food Inspection Agency had just issued a sweeping recall, pulling dozens of bread products after fragments of metal were discovered inside the loaves. Wonder Country Harvest, No Name, D'Italiano, President's Choice, names trusted for decades, were suddenly at the center of a food safety emergency. The contamination traced back to a single ingredient: salt. Sifto brand high-grade salt, used by some of the largest bread manufacturers in Canada, had become tainted with metal shards during processing. The recall swept through the industry in a matter of days, affecting supermarkets, independent grocers, and millions of households. The initial response from the Canadian Food Inspection Agency stunned food safety advocates. Despite the clear risk of physical injury from swallowing metal, officials classified the incident as not a high-risk situation. For Dr. Sylvain Charlebois, a professor of food policy and safety at Dalhousie University, this downplaying of danger was indefensible. He pointed to the vulnerabilities in Canada's industrial bread supply: factory lines running at maximum speed, aging equipment, and maintenance routines that sometimes fall behind. When you have this level of consolidation in food manufacturing, a single failure can have enormous consequences, Charlebois warned. In this case, one faulty batch of salt made its way into nearly every major bread brand sold in eastern Canada. The scale of the recall exposed the fragility of the system. With so many brands produced in the same facilities, a single point of contamination rippled across the market. The manufacturer's response was swift, production stopped, shelves were cleared, and new shipments arrived only after switching to an alternate salt supplier. But the damage was already done. For families who discovered metal in their bread, the recall was not an abstract regulatory event. It was a real and immediate threat at the breakfast table. Industry experts called for urgent reforms. Charlebois argued that the incident revealed deeper problems: outdated machinery, inconsistent inspection protocols, and a regulatory approach that sometimes prioritizes industry convenience over consumer safety. The recall became a flashpoint in the debate over Canada's food safety standards, forcing regulators and manufacturers to confront the very real dangers that can slip through even the most trusted brands. In the wake of the crisis, the question remained: if metal could find its way into the bread aisle, what other unseen risks might be lurking in every loaf? Food safety in Canada is supposed to rest on a foundation of science and oversight, but the reality is far messier. The rules that decide which chemicals end up in bread are shaped by a system riddled with loopholes, where industry often writes its own permission slip. Under GRAS, which stands for Generally Recognized as Safe, companies can introduce new additives without even telling regulators. The FDA, whose decisions ripple into Canadian policy, has reversed only 19 approvals in more than a decade, despite thousands of chemicals now in use. The sheer number of additives that slip through without full review is staggering. Thomas Neltner, a leading researcher on food additives, put it bluntly. The system is fundamentally broken. It is so bad that nobody knows, not even the FDA, what is in our food. This is not just about one agency or one country. Canadian oversight often mirrors these US decisions, meaning the same blind spots cross the border. While regulators claim to protect public health, their reliance on outdated laws and industry self-reporting leaves consumers exposed. The end result is a bread aisle shaped less by science and more by corporate convenience. For families, the real risk is not just what is in the bread, but how little anyone truly knows about it. Consumers are not powerless in the face of chemical-laden bread. The choices made at the checkout have already started to reshape the industry. When public pressure mounted over synthetic additives, some of the world's largest retailers responded. Walmart, for example, has set a deadline of January 2027 to remove synthetic food dyes and 30 other controversial ingredients from all its store brand products in the United States. While this pledge applies to United States stores, it signals a broader shift. Retailers are listening when shoppers demand cleaner labels and safer food. For Canadians looking to protect their families, the first step is to scrutinize ingredient lists. Watch for unfamiliar names: Azodicarbonamide, DATEM, calcium propionate, and high fructose corn syrup. If a label lists vague terms like dough conditioner or artificial flavor, consider reaching out to the manufacturer for clarity. Favor brands with the shortest, simplest ingredient lists, or try local bakeries that are transparent about their recipes. Every purchase is a message. When enough consumers choose bread free of questionable additives, manufacturers take notice. Some have already reformulated products in response to feedback. By demanding transparency and supporting retailers who commit to safer ingredients, ordinary shoppers can drive real change, one loaf at a time. Right now, Canadian bread shelves still carry additives banned in dozens of countries, despite mounting evidence of health risks and calls for reform. Every meal becomes a test of trust in regulators, labels, and the food system itself. Until transparency and accountability catch up, Canadians face a choice: accept the status quo or demand better from the bread on their table. What would you choose for your family? Let me know in the comments.